Hi, this is Kathleen Wilcox at Slow Wine, and I'm here with Kelby of Red Newt. And he's going to talk us through a tasting of three of his wines. So take it away.
All right. I think we will start with one of our classic wines, the 2016 Dry Riesling from Red Newt Cellars.
Great. All right. And it's a beauty. Let's see if I've got the bottle here. It's wonderful. It's a great bottle. So tell me about this one. Have you been making it since the beginning?
Yep. The founding winemaker and owner of Red Newt, Dave Whiting, who started the winery back in '98, was one of the early proponents of Riesling and dry Riesling in the Finger Lakes. I think that's surprising to people because it feels like such a natural combination now between the region and the grape. But in the mid and even up to, I remember in 2009 when I was getting into the industry, there was an article in a local newspaper from the wine critic asking what the right grape for the Finger Lakes was.
Wow.
So Dave's commitment to dry Riesling from 1998 was really something notable. I would say what we have seen is that the popularity of it has really gone up in the last 5 to 10 years in particular, which we're certainly appreciative of because we love making this wine.
And the popularity of the dry as well as the sweeter expressions, because I know you at Red Newt you offer a number of different expressions.
Yeah, and the dries become really popular even within the range.
Great. Okay. It's a great. The nose is great. It's beautiful. How do you describe the tasting notes? What do you taste when you taste it?
Yeah, so for us, we do a few things a little different with our Rieslings that I think is a beautiful expression of the site. This comes from a single vineyard across the lake from us called Lahoma. We don't label it that way just because it's more about this house style than it is. Sometimes we have to switch it to our other Riesling site depending on the year. But that house style we're looking for, we really like it to have like a lot of orange fruit, some nice high-toned orange fruit, but we also, in particular, like it to be really smoky and really minerally. And that's a combination of the site that we work with, and it's also a combination of the wine making once we get it here. Because the fruit that we bring in is so clean that we can get away with a technique called cold soaking. So we'll crush the fruit and leave the juice in contact with the skins at a cool temperature. We're not looking for fermentation for a day and sometimes up to 3 days to really extract a lot of body and aromatics from those skins before pressing it off.
That's really interesting. And then how do you age it and in what and for how long?
So from there, all of our Rieslings, certainly of recent vintages, go through spontaneous fermentation. So usually a pretty long, slow ferment, especially because it gets cold here in the winter and our cellar is not well insulated. But the result of that is that we leave it on the lees, usually in stainless steel. We're building up a program of large format old oak barrels, but that takes some time and some money to do. So that's in process. But in stainless steel, and we'll leave it on the full lees, all the yeast, for about 10 or 11 months before we eventually clean it up and bottle it right before the next harvest. So we kind of in the same way that we're trying to get all the body and power we can from the skins, we try and do the reverse on the flip side with the yeast lees and try and get as much of that weight into the finished wine that we can.
That's great. That's really interesting. And you, so the yeasts are always native ferments. You never use commercial. That's great. Okay. And now how would you say this compares? We have this other bottle that's it's different. The label is different. It's a beautiful label. They're both great. How would you say this is different? And also, how many Rieslings do you do?
In an average year, we probably make 12 different Rieslings.
Okay.
12 to 15. I think it comes along with being a Riesling winemaker. You can't help yourself but to bottle all these very specific expressions. Uh, and partially it's because Riesling is so terroir expressive. You know, you
Yes,
really get big differences based on the soil that it's in. And it's because Riesling can balance at so many different points. It's not always, it's certainly not always sweet, but it's also doesn't always have to be dry. You have a lot of latitude as a winemaker.
absolutely. And now these are both 2016s. What's the oldest that you typically would drink? I mean, obviously Riesling, we know Riesling can age. How long do you think your Riesling is in its prime?
I would say, so for our dry Riesling, kind of our classic dry, the 16's the current release. We intentionally age for a couple years in bottle, partially because of that spontaneous ferment or a native ferment. They go into bottle pretty, I guess backwards would be the term. There's a ton of, you can tell there's this energetic core and potential to them. And there are ways to add things to wine to speed up the aging process so they're ready to go as soon as you bottle. But we prefer to just let it have the time in bottle to do it naturally and give it a couple years before we release it. So I usually say it takes 3 years after the vintage before one of our dry Rieslings starts to come into its own. And then I think it kind of chills out at that first prime. I think it chills out at that first prime level, probably for another 5 to 10 years,
Got it.
uh, and then uh, ages beautifully beyond that. Especially now that we're in this style and bottling under screw cap, which is so nice for Rieslings.
When did you start bottling under screw cap?
The 15 vintage is when we switched over.
And why?
We would have done it sooner. We'd actually been running trials in-house since 2005, but we had to buy an entire new bottling line in order to do it.
Got it. Okay. All right. Okay. And now this nose to me is much more floral. What are you getting?
I would agree. I mean, so this wine is actually from the same vineyard site, although this one is labeled and designated as such. This is from a little parcel we call the knoll,
Okay.
because as the name would imply, it's a knoll within the vineyard. It's a little 2-acre hill, and because it's a hill, it has a different soil type than that which is around it. So the dry Riesling comes from almost like the shoulders of the hill. The soil is a little heavier. It's a little more fruit forward.
Okay.
And then the top of the hill, the knoll, is generally speaking is a little more floral, and as a wine is a little more structured. It's a little bit more to the sort of body and acid balance of the wine in comparison. And we certainly consider this our top expression. It is definitely a winemaker's top expression, right? Like I'm rewarding the fact that it has these sorts of nebulous structure sort of ideas, but there are things that, there's almost like a salinity to the knoll that I think is always really beautiful.
I agree. It's really a beautiful wine. And the texture on the two are totally different too. This one is a little bit silkier and the other one, I mean, they're both beautiful. They're just very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you're looking at, even though they're from almost the same exact spot, the knoll is really decomposed sandstone, which is pretty rare in the Finger Lakes. And then on the shoulders of the knoll, you do have that sandstone element, but you have more of the like loam and gravel that we would expect in the Finger Lakes typically.
Okay, very interesting. And I'm super excited to try the Cabernet Franc too, which I think is really an up and coming grape in the region as well. It's just has such a beautiful expression.
Yeah.
How long have you been making the Cab Franc?
Cab Franc has been around in Red Newt's portfolio as long as Riesling. It was really started to get planted in the mid 90s in the Finger Lakes in earnest, and it was clear immediately that it just that the grapes did well. I think it took a while to really get a handle for how to work with it in the vineyard and in the winery, but it was always clear that the grapes liked it here, and that's step number one. But yeah, it's a growing category for us. People have really started to discover Finger Lakes Cabernet Franc.
And what are do you know off the top of your head, if you don't, that's okay, the case numbers or the bottle numbers for each of these particular wines?
Yeah, the dry Riesling would be around, let's see, 18,000 bottles.
Okay.
The Knoll is usually around 2,500 bottles. And then the Cabernet Franc is around 8,000 bottles.
Okay. And do you see that changing, the balance changing? Do you see yourselves planting any other grapes more or pulling out any others in the future?
I could see the Cabernet Franc growing probably the most relative to its base rate.
Okay. Yeah.
The Knoll we're really hemmed in by. I mean, that's as much as we can make.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the dry Riesling, actually, I could see that's been growing as well, which is a bit of robbing Peter to pay Paul, because it's shifted away from some of our sweeter styles within the portfolio towards the dry.
How do you feel about that personally as a winemaker? Because I think that sweet wine isn't taken as seriously, but obviously it can be beautiful. So what's your feeling on that?
Yeah. It's complicated for that reason, like, because they're beautiful wines when they're sweeter, but there is a reality that dry Riesling, if people are liking dry Riesling, it's because they're taking Riesling more seriously.
That's true. Absolutely.
At least right, and hope maybe in 10 or 20 years we'll be on the other side of that curve, but it does seem like the increase in dry Riesling is because people are more serious. People are taking it with more interest.
Absolutely. So this Cab Franc is absolutely fascinating. There's a spiciness to it. What do you get from the tasting and the aromas?
It always has that spice note. It has like a pepper note that isn't an herbaceous pepper. It's like spice pepper,
Exactly.
almost like white pepper. It's fun to make. We make a couple different Cabernet Francs. This one is maybe my favorite to make. It comes in small ferments. We foot stomp it, which we can get the interns to do one time before they realize it isn't actually all that much fun. And then we ferment it on the stems, and we still use an old basket press to press it off. For the Rieslings, we use a more modern press like anyone would, but we use like an I Love Lucy style 1-ton wooden basket press for the Cabernet Franc. But interestingly, after all that, we put this into stainless steel. It never goes into oak.
Interesting. I wouldn't have guessed that.
Yeah, and we do oaked Cabernet Francs, but this bottling in particular is about really capturing how beautiful and juicy the fruit of Cabernet Franc is in the Finger Lakes. It's just, it just leaps out of the glass. I've often joked that it actually almost reminds me more of Cru Beaujolais than anything else, because there's like this red fruit underlaid with mineral is kind of.
Yeah, I could definitely see that, and it's perfect for the summer. Do you ever put this in the fridge for 10 minutes before you drink it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Well, is there anything else that you would like people to know about your winery before we sign off?
No, I think I'm just honored to be chatting and hope that people have a great time finding our wines or coming to visit us and trying them. We have a lot of fun working on them.
Absolutely. They're beautiful wines. Thank you so much for your time, and I will speak with you soon. And thank you for the gorgeous wines.
Thank you.